You're listening to Neurodivergent Mates. Hello and welcome to Neurodivergent Mates. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, and I gotta say, I do have a massive cold I'm getting over, so I apologize for my husky voice. But today we've got an awesome return of an awesome guest, Dr. Matt. How's it going, my friend?
Well, Will, I'm doing a little bit better than you are, that's for sure. But you with a cold is better than most people fully healthy. So you know what?
Yeah.
Let's ride with it. Yeah.
Totally, my friend. Totally. It's and like I was saying to you before we started, it sounds a lot worse than what it actually is. So I don't know. I don't know, but like, you know, when you've had like a head cold and it's like you've got sinuses and stuff like that, and then it moves down. All my head now feels great. It's just my throat. It doesn't hurt or anything. It's just husky and all of that. My wife said it was sexy, so maybe I should keep the voice, right?
Yeah. I mean, every so often I'll have a cold when I'm on a podcast and I'll listen to it and I'll be like, oh, I sound like I'm in a deeper register.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, what? It's not the worst thing in the world. You don't sound like you're dying. So,
Well, the thing is, like, I don't know about you. So this really came on because I was teaching for a day. So my voice wasn't really good. And then I had to teach for a whole day. Public speaking, do you get like that a lot? Like you'll get off stage and you're like, oh my God, like I've just been speaking for the whole day and my throat is just like I've put it through a cheese grater type of thing.
Yeah. Dude, when I'm on the road and I've had the good fortune to be on the road a lot this fall. I mean, my throat is my instrument. So I'm like carrying like big bags of cough drops. Like I'm always having I only drink iced coffee. I don't drink hot coffee on the road. Like it's about keeping the instrument, right? And I remember I was at a conference, and as we were wrapping up night one, and I was going on first thing in the morning, the conference organizer was like, do a shot with me. And I was like, I really shouldn't. I'm working in the morning. He's like, come on. And I was like, all right, well, we'll do something like nice, like a nice bourbon or something. And I got over there and there was tequila. And it was like rack shelf tequila. And I was like, oh, I'm going to hate myself. And it wasn't the alcohol, right? It was only an ounce of alcohol. But like, the burn. And in the morning, I was sound like a zombie, right? Like,
But that's the thing, right? Like imagine if you were like a singer and you get a cold, you can see why like they've got to cancel shows and then you're letting down like a whole stadium of people down. You just can't sing.
Yeah. My best friend in college he was a very good singer. He's still a very good singer. But yeah, I mean, it's so funny because it's college and, you're partying, you're going to all these things, but you could always tell when he would have a show coming up, he'd be like, guys, I can't drink tonight. Like, come on, man. But guys, I can't drink tonight. I've got a show in the morning. And he would show up he would sometimes go to the party, but he just wouldn't drink. He would just have some water. And I mean, like, I always appreciated that dedication because like, I am not that disciplined of a human being, man. I am like, damn the torpedoes, we'll figure it out tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Actually, you know what, right? Like I spoke at a conference a few weeks ago now, and I did have a few drinks the night before. Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever do that one again. Hey, a few drinks is okay, but a little bit over, just probably not the best when you're speaking the next day, if that makes sense.
I'd say so, right?
But anyway, let's move on. So today what we're going to be covering is the unique world of twice exceptional 2E individuals. And when I thought, man, we've got to get Dr. Matt back on, this was the first thing that come to mind, my friend. I think, I'm twice exceptional. You're twice exceptional, I'm pretty sure, correct?
Yes, sir.
So I thought this would be the perfect time to pull out all the guns and talk about this. But what we might do just before we do get started, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So just for any new listeners out there, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media pages. We're available on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. And if you haven't already done so, please go to wherever you listen to your podcasts and subscribe to us, comment, give us a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Also, check out our sponsor, Neurodiversity Academy. You can check us out at neurodiversityacademy.com. I think this next part's funny. Oh, not really funny, but warning, some discussions may be triggering. If you need help, please reach out to a loved one or call emergency services. We are not doctors. The thing is, you are a doctor. We have a doctor here today. That's why I thought it was funny. This is a space for sharing experiences and strategies. Also, too, if you've got any questions, please put it into the live chat wherever you're listening to us through a live stream, so through our social media platforms. And if it's something we think would be great to share, we'll put it onto the podcast. So, what we might do, Dr. Matt, there could be some new listeners who maybe have never listened to you before or know much about you. Please share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm a clinical psychologist and a professional speaker who works primarily with neurodivergent kids and, and adults to help them get their needs met. And I do this work because I am a twice exceptional person myself. I am gifted in ADHD. And, so when I was little, I was like, I want to work with people like me. I want to help people whose brains work like my brain. And, and I've built sort of this whole career around this, and it's been a great ride. I mean, as we learn more about these brains and like the messaging comes out more online, what you're seeing is more and more people leaning into like, oh, the differences in my brain matter. And I can use the understanding of those differences to get my needs met at school, at work, with my friends, with my loved ones. And it really goes a long way to making your life better.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, it's I think for me when I was growing up, twice exceptional just wasn't a term that was really used. Yeah. When do you reckon that really came into place, that term, out of curiosity?
So it's been in the field, it's been in the journals and the articles for 40, 50 years at this point. Mm-hmm. But it really didn't make its way into like more common understanding until the 2000s. Mm-hmm. And so there are still some mental health professionals and administrators out there who are going to say like a kid can't be gifted and autistic. Right? They can't be both. Like, no, they not only can, many of them are.
What right? type of people are saying that? But because if you fully are in the neurodiversity field, and this is just me guessing this, right? Wouldn't you be like, well, no, that's wrong?
Well, and that's the thing. Like, imagine, I'm thinking about one particular school psychologist that I've crossed swords with a few times. This is a guy who got his job in the 70s and wrote it out. I mean, like, yes, we have continuing education obligations, but it's easy enough to cherry pick what you want to learn and not see broader sea changes in the field. And also a lot of it stems from the fact that we've tried to cram psychology through the medical model, right? So you have a cold. That is a thing that we can diagnose. It's a thing I can point to and be like, haha, it's a cold. If you break your leg, if you sprain your elbow, those are things we can image, see, they're concrete, they're discrete things. Mental health and neurodivergence, they're messier, right? Like, you're someone who's depressed, you can also have anxiety, you can also have ADHD. Those things may have a lot to do with each other. They may have nothing to do with each other, but our brains are almost like a quantum state. Things exist and not exist and work in very weird relationships to each other. And these are the sort of things that the medical model fails to grasp. So you're seeing ever so slowly psychology shifting to be a little bit more holistic view of how humans are. And I think that's going to help us start to treat things as more broad topics like neurodivergent without getting so hung up on what the neurodivergence is. Whereas that might not work in the medical model, because if they said you have cancer, your first question is going to be, where's the cancer? I need to know this so I can do something about it. Like, you've got cancer. Great. No, more words, please. Right?
Yeah. But so what I'm sort of thinking is, if you're talking about that gentleman who got his started in the 70s, would it be hard for someone like that? Like the term, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yep.
Is it sort of like that type of thing, that they're just not open to change, or realizing that, oh my God, what I've been talking about for all these years, that doesn't really apply now?
Well, probably the best way to think about it right now is that there's a lot of people who are leaning into the concept of being AUDHD, right? So the AU is autism, and then ADHD, right? So because for many years we thought you couldn't be autistic and ADHD, right? Like one is overwhelms the other. Now we know a lot more nuance about how the prefrontal cortex works and how these systems of functioning in the brain work. As our understanding of the brain gets more nuanced, we can see the different pathways these things take, right? And I think that's why we can have these conversations now that we couldn't have 20 years ago, because we just know so much more, and at the same time know so comparably very little about the brain, right? But we're moving in a direction where you're seeing more people really embrace this AUDHD model, and like, rock on, do the thing, right? Because as I'm fond of saying, in life it is better to know that you're a zebra, not a weird horse. Right? And there's a lot of people out there who think they're weird horses, right? They're thinking like, like every other horse can do these things. Why can't I do that thing? It's because perhaps, my friend, you were a zebra the whole time.
Interesting. Look, moving on from that, what does twice exceptional mean? I know you and I know this, but like, there could be a lot of listeners who are like, what's this term? And I know with a lot of so with Neurodiversity Academy, we're doing a lot of work in vocational education, and we're looking to go into higher education. And I think it's really important to be able to learn about those types of learners, because I know when I was younger, it was very difficult for me because people just didn't understand that I was incredibly intelligent, but struggled with so many other things. So you're already put into the hard basket a lot of the time, where it's like, what the hell's going on? So could you please explain it in maybe a little bit more detail?
Yeah. So twice exceptional is when you have a gifted level IQ and some sort of secondary or other learning difference. So another neurodivergence. And those are usually ADHD, autism, and specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, or dyspraxia. Now, there are other things that are under that umbrella, but those are sort of the big six. Those are the ones we talk about a lot. And what that tells us is that gifted as a neurodivergence already comes with strengths and weaknesses, peaks and valleys. The more neurodivergent you are, the more you go into that twice exceptional space, the higher the highs and the lower the lows, right? And what I like to tell people is that there are sort of unofficially 3 different kinds of twice exceptional kids. There's the kind of twice exceptional like me, when I was a kid, where I was gifted in 2nd grade, and no one ever paid attention to the fact that I always forgot that there was tests. My backpack looked like a bomb went off, right? I always forgot the homework, but did it in 3 minutes before class and got an A on it, right? So my strengths overshadowed my weaknesses. It wasn't
Yeah.
until school got harder than I was smart that people were like, "Oh my gosh, you totally have ADHD." I'm like, "I totally do." And then there's more, which sort of sounds like your experience, where they're focusing more on the deficits. The like, this is a problem kid. This kid can't sit still. This kid can't pay attention. This kid can't read, right? And they're so busy focusing on what you can't do that they have a tough. They don't ever stop to think, what could you do, and what are the skills you have, you know? So if we don't ever, if a kid shows up and they can't read, and that's all we focus on, we may never learn that they're great problem solvers or great writers or great mathematicians, right?
You're already put in the too hard basket.
Yeah. And then that's all you see.
Well, yeah. Well, I remember, if I think back to school, it was very confusing because I was failing big time with a lot of the main subjects. So math, English, it wasn't my thing. But other areas I would excel at. I'd have A's. I remember I was incredibly great at sport. And I think once I got into the working world, that was where my strengths really started to shine. But, during that time through school, it was incredibly difficult. And it caused a lot of, I suppose, mental harm, if that's the word I'm looking for, because you really doubt yourself. So, and it was actually interesting because I have connected with a lot of people I used to go to school with. And I often, they know a lot of the work I'm doing and with neurodiversity, all of that. And they're like, "Oh, I'm neurodivergent as well." I'm like, "Wow, I didn't even know that." And I said, and I talked to them about like how I had no confidence and I really had a bad time during school. My mental health was bad. And they're like, "What? I didn't think that at all. I just saw you as the cool, popular kid." And I'm thinking, I was the cool, popular kid. I just didn't see that because all of these other things were going on in my head, which were taking me away from what everyone else was perceiving me as, which just blows my mind.
Yeah. And I mean, thank you for sharing that, right? Because our perceptions of ourselves can be so discordant with how the world sees us in a positive way or a negative way, right? And before we dive deeper into that, let me talk about the third kinds of twice exceptional kid. So you could imagine, right, that if you were really good at some things, right? Like let's say in school, you take tests and do papers really well. So you're getting good marks on all those things, but you don't pay attention in class, you don't participate, you don't always do your homework. So those things all come out as zeros. So if we throw all those terms together and we weight them appropriately, what you're going to end up with is an average score, right? So in the field, this is called the gifted C, because in the US we use the letters grade system.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Right? So so it's this idea that if you look at a kid's grades at the end of the year and it's all average, your brain automatically defaults to that kid is just average. But a lot of times you'll have a kid whose high highs and low lows cancel each other out, so they end up in the middle. And you think about your favorite, Aussie Rules football team. Like there are some great teams, there are some terrible teams, and there are some teams that have great players and lousy players, so they end up in the middle of the pack, right? So it doesn't change the fact that they have great players. But if all you did was look at the standings, and then you're like, "Oh, the Rabbitohs are just an average regular team," when they actually the real story might be much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, crazy. So moving on from that, how can someone be gifted and have challenges? And I know you sort of said a little bit about that, and And I think maybe some people, and I think like you were saying before, like it can sort of cancel things out. Like not can I don't know if that's the right word, but like sometimes our strengths are what's the word I'm looking for? And maybe when I was at school, maybe people didn't realize I was struggling so hard because maybe my strengths was socializing and being out there, and people were just seeing that and not seeing that I was really struggling there. You know, so how can someone be both gifted and have challenges?
Mm-hmm. So this gets into a lot of the neuroscience of being neurodivergent, right? So if you're a neurotypical person, right, and 80% of people are neurotypical, that means that those people's brains work basically as we expect them to work. 20% of us are neurodivergent, right? And giftedness is a part of that, twice exceptional is a part of that. When you're neurodivergent, you develop asynchronously. You go out of sync. So if you imagine that there are 5 developmental spheres, right? Intellectual, academic, social, emotional, and physical. Now, for most people, each one of those 5 get 20%, right? It's an equal distribution. When you're neurodivergent, that process becomes disrupted. So you might get intellectual and academic, they each get 30%, not 20%. And since there's a finite amount of energy, there's that the rest of that 40% now is split amongst 3 things. So you see kids with weaker social, emotional, and physical skills. We could also invert that, right? You were a kid who was great at sport. So maybe you got 25 or 30% in that area, and maybe it dragged you down a little bit academically, but not intellectually, right? Because we know you're a very smart human, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we all know academics doing school is a skill. Not everybody gets that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we see is that the more disrupted this developmental path becomes, there are essentially like pockets or holes that occur in somebody's developmental path. So you might have a kid, I'm thinking about a young woman I work with. She was diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. So, physical disability in writing and reading. She's also gifted. And people would say like, oh, well, she's probably gifted in like nonverbal learning, right? Like she's probably a good STEM student.
Mm-hmm.
She had a gifted verbal IQ. How could she do that? Because when she answered the questions verbally, she had great hearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I asked her, like, I won't use her real name, Becca, like, Becca, what does the word arrogant mean? And she would pop that definition out, right? But in school, it would be the word arrogant would be on a worksheet, and she would have to read that word and then write the definition.
Right, yeah.
She couldn't do, right? So what we gave this kid was a voice to text system, and we told her to write a story. And she's like, I can't write. I'm like, right. So how about this? Tell me a story. And I'm telling you, the story that exploded out of her was one of the best things I've ever read from any author of any age. And just sitting there and watching this girl who was so convinced that she was less smart, less good because of her learning differences. Like, no, she was their classic type 2 kid. No one would have ever thought to look for those strengths. We were in a position to do so because of the kind of school I met her at. And, I know now that she's doing amazing work in the spaces she's in as a creative type person. And that's, when you think about the opportunities we have to unlock the talents in people, I mean, that's why we all do what we do, right? That's why you do what you do and I do what I do. And all the teachers and professionals who listen to this podcast, like, we're trying to find that spark in those kids.
So would you say that technology has really helped that person that you're speaking about?
I mean, technology can be one of the biggest tools to help kids, overcome the challenges that come with being neurodivergent.
Because I've got to admit that technology has changed my life to unbelievable. I just feel like I'm ahead of everyone else now almost. Not by the technology, because what I have always wanted to get out of my head, I'm now able to utilize technology to be able to help me get that out there, where in the past it's been a real challenge to go, how do I get this onto paper? You know, let's take, and AI has been great for me.
Yep.
I don't know how it is for everyone else, but for me, it's been great because a lot of the time, and you've probably come across this a lot, just starting something is incredibly hard. What does that need to look like? Well, how do I start? Now I can just go to ChatGPT and say, look, I'm creating this. What do I need to create? Where do I start? And then it's just like the boom gates open, the water just comes flushing out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about an adult I work with actually, who he has a lot of like perfectionistic tendencies, a lot of anxiety. So what we do for him is, well, I was like, listen, when you need to get a rough draft, use ChatGPT to give you a rough draft. Then you go through and edit what ChatGPT has to say, and you do it in your voice, and you put your knowledge in there. And what he's found is that ChatGPT raises the floor, and then he can raise the ceiling, right? But he has such a tough time getting started that he might never write the copy if he has to do it himself. But say like, all right, ChatGPT, do this thing. And then he goes and gets a coffee and he comes back and there's a halfway decent, page and a half on whatever he needs to talk about.
Start getting ideas.
Right. And then he goes like, oh, that's good. That's good. I would change that. We need to expand on this point. And he's carrying all this secret shame. And I was like, well, what if you told your boss? He's like, well, then I would get fired immediately. I'm like, would you? Because I got to tell you, I would bet you a steak dinner that you're not the only person at your job who's using ChatGPT. So he did sort of mention that to his boss. His boss like, oh yeah, we all use it. Just don't ever submit something that's ChatGPT and claim that it's you. And he's like, to live in that world, right? So all of a sudden, his life's gotten easier and more manageable, and he hasn't had to change, right? He didn't have to fix his brain. He's using tools in a way that allows him to play to his strengths, and everybody's happier for it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's I love the period where, and it's probably only going to get better. That I'm like, oh my God, I am able to get these things done, and then people are. So, for example, I developed a professional development course the other day. Now, I've probably always been able to do that, but a lot of the time I've had self-doubt. Because I haven't worked in that field before of like structural design in learning and all of that, but being able to sit down with ChatGPT and just go, look, where do I start? What do I need? It would spit me out stuff and I'd be like, I don't like that. You know what I mean? And build off from it. I know exactly what I've put in there. I haven't, it's not, some people may see that using ChatGPT might be classed as cheating, but, for me, it's not cheating at all. It's like going, okay, that's good. That sucks. Get rid of that. We don't need all of that. And I've just been able to build off from that, if that makes sense.
I mean, absolutely. And in its own way, it's the logical evolution of people used to hate computers because they thought that it made typing irrelevant. People used to hate word processing programs. They're like, well, aren't kids going to learn how to handwrite? And it's just like, guys, can we all just get off our high horses for a second here, right? There's always going to be a need to handwrite, just like there's always going to be a need to create your own content. But when we can work smarter, not harder, like if I'm cooking dinner for my family and I forget to defrost the chicken, I don't not cook dinner for my family because I didn't put this chicken in the temp. I put it in the microwave, and then the microwave defrosts it for me. Then I cook the chicken. I mean, it's I don't go in the backyard and kill a bird and skin it and break it down myself because we don't have chickens. And frankly, that freaks me out, man. I wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
so do you live in like a suburban area?
Yes.
So I think your neighbors might be a little bit like, oh my God, Dr. Matt's really losing it. He's
Why is he
cutting their heads.
walking around with a sharp knife and like covered in blood?
Yeah,
That's how you make bad relations with the neighbors.
totally.
It's the sort of thing like I remember reading a book about technology in the classroom a few years ago, and it bothered me because they were like, well, kids today can't read maps. They can only use the GPS. And I'm like, do you remember using maps? You have to fold them, and it was like always the worst fold in human history. And then you have to figure out where you are. And like, yeah, you're like, okay, so Uluru is there.
Yeah.
Supposed to be in Cairns. So I think something has gone wrong. And like, objectively speaking, GPSs are a better system than maps.
Now, but they still have their flaws.
Yeah. And that because there is no perfect system. 5 years from now, when there's a better thing than GPS, whatever that might be, there are gonna be people like, you remember the good old days of GPS? Like,
yeah.
Geez, like, let's all just calm down a second. And it is helpful to be able to read a map if your GPS goes out. Like if you're on walkabout and you need to find a way home, GPS isn't going to help you, but knowing how to read a map could. So it's not either or, it's what's the best tool for this job, right? And so much of taking the ideas of neurodivergent education, right, and expanding them to society, this is what we call universal design. Because the best practices for neurodivergent kiddos are just the best practices, full stop. Right? If a kid is really good at something, we want to give them those skills and give them as much exposure as we can, and then teach them the other things they need to know along the way. Every person on planet Earth would benefit from that kind of model, whether that's at school or at work.
It's almost like a calculator.
Right?
Do you know what I mean? Like before calculators were a thing, you had to do that in your head or on a piece of paper, right? Then you were given a calculator in school. You know, how's that not different to utilizing this technology? Correct.
Yeah, right. I mean, and there are times, I remember being in school, teachers like, you're not always going to have a calculator with you. First off, yes, I do. Right?
Yeah. Is that a calculator or is that your phone?
My phone, right? But
I suppose it is a calculator, isn't it?
Right?
I was going to say, you've got an old school calculator?
Yeah, at all times, Will. Right?
Yeah.
Here's my slide rule. Here's my protractor.
Yeah.
But it's also, I do a lot of IQ testing as part of my job, right? And when we're diagnosing kids as gifted or twice exceptional, you've got to do the testing. When I'm running those numbers, I don't do the math in my head. I could. I'm very good at mental math. But I use a calculator because the calculator is smarter than me. The calculator is not going to drop a 1 or forget to carry the negative sign. Like the calculator is going to do the job, right? And frankly, do it faster than me, right? So, I don't think I'm a worse psychologist because I use a calculator, just like I don't think you're a worse at writing or social media or whatever you use ChatGPT for if you're using that tool, right? Because, a tool matters, but the user matters more. Right? It's not the plane, it's the pilot, right? And that matters.
Do you know what, right? Like I was speaking to a doctor who's doing a lot of research in supporting students who are struggling in higher education, vocational education. She's also looking at like online education, which is huge. And we were talking about like the use of technology to be able to support neurodivergent students. And a big thing, especially in the vocational and higher education space, we are seeing a lot of people using ChatGPT to cheat, if that makes sense. And I spoke to her about this and I said, what are your thoughts that, ChatGPT is, people are using it to cheat? And she goes, look, the thing is, cheating has always been there. We're just in a different realm of cheating now. Like before, say ChatGPT, people would copy someone else's assignment or they would just copy and paste straight from Google into their document or whatever thing like that. And it's like, this is just the new way of cheating. But like you were saying before, it does come down to the individual. What's the individual going to take away if they're just putting in something that they've copied or whatever they haven't been a part of creating? And I think for me, when I create something like a course or whatever like that, I don't just copy and paste and put it in and not know what I've put in there. I know exactly what I've put in, because a lot of the time I've gone, that is crap. I need something that's more what I'm looking for, if that makes sense.
Right. And I mean, that's exactly it. And these society always pushes back on change, right? Because change is hard and it's easy. Well, kids will use it to cheat. You're right. You know what else kids use to cheat? Their phones, their laptops. And before that, their buddies. And before that, running off copies of the exam and slipping them into somebody's notebook. Right. And I'm sure Plato and Aristotle had somebody who was like carving out like chiseled things on the side. Yeah, I'm like, I got this, right? Like,
yeah.
So and I actually think that's why we're seeing increased shift to creative outlets and processes and project-based learning, because they're things that not only resist cheating, but force the kind of engagement that makes you not want to cheat in the first place, right? Like if I have to take a chapter test with 25 questions from a book I didn't read, it is a lot easier to be like, ChatGPT, tell me the summary of that book, and then take my chances based on the summary of the book. But if it's like, here are the ideas of the book 1984. Now, I want you to tell me what that would look like in Minecraft, or tell me what that would look like at a surfing competition, or tell me what that would look like in a French restaurant. Like, we're sending that in the lens of the kid's interest and forcing them to not only engage with the information, but engage in the way that you can't cheat that. You have to, if you're building something, making something, it is much harder to cut those corners. And what you're going to find is kids are going to build more resilience. They're going to trust the process more, and they're not going to want to cheat as much, because that's the kind of thing where, and my grandfather always said this, that hard work is its own reward. The thing he missed was hard work that means something is its own reward. Right? I could go ask you to go mow your backyard by hand, Will. Right? Go get some scissors, and they go. That's hard.
Considering I live in an apartment, that would be incredibly hard.
Do it anyway, right?
Yeah, I could do it anyway. Yeah, my neighbors might think I'm crazy, but I'll give it a go.
I do love. But like, what's he doing?
Yeah. Exactly. But no, look, moving on from that, like, so what issues do 2E students face in school? And I've sort of named a few of them there, but what specifically would they maybe come against a lot of the time? I know misunderstanding was a big one for me.
Misunderstanding and that asynchrony is another big thing, because we tend to treat kids at the highest level of their functioning, right? So if you have a 10-year-old who's intellectually 16 and talks and acts like a 16-year-old, you're going to start recalibrating your mental expectations of that kid, that, oh, they're 16. They're an adult, right? But then they do something that a 10-year-old does, pick their nose or make a fart noise in class or say girls are gross or whatever 10-year-olds do, right? Then you're that much more disappointed, because you're not grading them as a 10-year-old, you're grading them as a 16-year-old, right? And so when I talk to parents and teachers, like, when you've got a neurodivergent kid, the first thing you got to do is stop and remind yourself, how old is this kid? Not how old do they act or how old do they seem, but how old they are, because that's going to make much more realistic expectations, which are going to make your interventions much more reasonable. But let's take that a step further and talk about one of the other ways they struggle is through that asynchrony, is that kids don't necessarily have the social and emotional skills to manage the challenges we're handing them, right? So you know, um, you know, to our good friend Photon John, right? A very common intervention for musically gifted kids is to move them up to the next school's band. So if you're a middle school student, we would move you up to the high school, right? And this kid can absolutely do the music, right? If it's the flute or the drums or the saxophone, they can do it. But can they handle being in a room with a bunch of high school kids who are talking about high school things, right? Can they create relationships? Can they emotionally handle the stress and the higher stakes? One of the kids I work with, he was just at his first marching band competition and he had a panic attack because he's like, I'm the littlest and youngest person here. And, he's like, pound for pound, I might be the best musician on the field, but I'm a shrimp compared to these giant hulking kids. And, so he and I were on the phone. I helped him calm down and we talked about setting expectations. But it's like, we've got to be very nuanced and very intentional with how we put in interventions for kids like this. Because the reality is that asynchrony model says a kid who's 10 years old but can operate like a 16-year-old on their best, but operates like a 6-year-old at their worst. All parts of that kid have to exist if we're going to come up with a plan that serves them. So it means we've got to really be thoughtful in how we attach these things.
See, if I think back to when I was in school, I would always be in arguments with my teachers, or I'd tell them to, go F off, or, you know what I mean? Because a lot of the time, I look back at it now and I'm like, oh my God, I was so ADHD. They had no idea that I was ADHD. And a lot of the things that were getting under their skin, I had no idea about. And I felt like they were attacking me. And probably because I didn't have, the I suppose the maturity to be able to go, approach it properly. I wouldn't do that now, of course. I would just lose it at the teachers. So it's a common thing I found. Yeah. But would you find that would be something that some TUI students may struggle with as well, because they're not really comprehending what the teacher sort of understands about them?
Oh, absolutely. And let's throw another layer on that, because if you don't understand yourself, it's awfully hard to accept somebody else understanding you or misunderstanding you. Right. And that's a thing that when we see that these kids, just go back to the words we used before, they're walking around thinking they're weird horses, and they don't want to be a weird horse, but they don't know they can be a zebra. They don't know what that looks like. So there's an angst to what that is and what that feels like.
That was probably me. Remember, I spoke about like how I was in school, and I'm thinking, man, I'm not learning that was the cool popular kid. I was definitely thinking I was the weird horse.
Yeah, right. And everyone's like, that's the coolest zebra I've ever met. Oh my God. That's right. Well, yeah, I guess to make this more Aussie, we could say a lot of people think they're kangaroos, but they're really wallabies. I don't know.
Yes, true. They're smaller.
Right. And not all dogs are dingoes, something like that. We'll figure it out. But the idea here is that you can't name it to tame it if you don't know what it is you're trying to name. Right. So that's why podcasts like this are so important, because there are going to be people out there who are hearing this and thinking, holy shit, they're talking about me. I didn't know that this word existed for somebody like me, and, I have a client I work with who's, through the course of the work we've done for many years, he was like, so Dr. Matt, and so there's a big overlap between the LGBTQ community and the neurodivergent community. There's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And he's a very neurodivergent kid. He's like, Dr. Matt, I got to tell you, I don't, it seems like everybody else has crushes on people and gets sexually attracted to people. It's always like, oh, they're so hot and they're so hot and they're so hot. And they're like, I don't feel those ways. And he's like, I don't think it's that I don't like girls, that I like boys. I just don't like anybody. And he's like, is this depression? is there something wrong with me? And I, let him talk for a while. I was like, buddy, have you ever heard of the term asexual? And he's like,
Yeah.
heard of that term. And I'm like, so here's what asexual means, right? And some people abbreviate it as ACE. So like, here's an ACE community near you. And he went to a meeting and he's like, these are my people. I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know that was a term. You want to say you can't name it to tame it if you don't know what you're trying to name. Now he's a proud asexual student. He has the asexual flag in his dorm, right? And of course, like people will come in and be like, "Oh, what flag is that?" Because he is not Caucasian, let's say, and so people will come in and be like, "Oh man, is that your home country?"
That's hilarious. Oh my God, is that your home country?
I was like, one time you should mess with people. Be like, yes, that's the country I'm from. What country do you think I'm from?
Yeah. Yeah, true. But look, what effect does that bring? What effect does being 2E have on self-esteem? So, we've just spoken about like people not understanding certain things about themselves and all of that. And I can tell you right now that for me, especially leaving high school, my self-esteem was right down. That was where I started to get into drugs, alcohol, because that was what really it almost killed the pain, if that makes sense, And I think this is, and it's interesting. Sometimes I think if I had known earlier, would my life have been different? Or would I have still? And look, I think sometimes too that what I did experience, maybe that did contribute to who I am today, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll tell you, like, one of the things that hurts twice exceptional kids in particular as compared to gifted kids is there's this perception that gifted kids are good kids, right? And so a gifted kid would never smoke marijuana. A gifted kid would never go and drink alcohol, right? And then, like, I think about myself in high school, and I was smoking a lot of marijuana, and nobody knew because I had to get out of my head, right? Like, it was a 38-piece orchestra up here, and everybody else has got like the clapping monkey, ching, 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 and I'm like, bum, 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 ba, ba, ba. And it's like, it was exhausting, right? And so if you don't understand the full impact of being neurodivergent on trying to live in the world, then you would never think that a gifted or neurodivergent kid would turn to drugs or alcohol. But a lot of the kids that I talk to who do use those substances say for the same reasons, like, I want to get out of my head. I want to not feel this way for a little while. And I know it's not the best thing in the world for me, right? But also, like, what other options do I have? Because I don't know if you've seen The World recently, Dr. Matt, but holy shit. And I'm like, yeah. Like, there are reasons to want to get out of your head. And
considering what's just happened in your country, it's going to get a hell of a lot more interesting.
Yeah. And interesting is a very kind word for what I would rather say, which we would probably have to bleep out. Yeah. So that's fun.
It might create you some more business, Dr. Matt.
I mean, I'm never going to be out of work, but yes, things are very, like, a lot of clients have come out of the woodwork this week. They'd be like, hey, I'm like, come on in. It's it's like the guy who like builds the life raft if there might be a flood, and then everyone's like, oh my god, the village is flying. Like, gotta get on the raft. I told you, right? Raft, right? So yeah, I mean, it's hard to be out there. And one of the things that makes it harder for people like us is that the world is not built for people like us, right? 80% of people are neurotypical, so they built the world for them. And they didn't do it intentionally to hurt us, right? There was no ill intent there. But the reality is the world doesn't work for people like us. It's not meant to work for people like us. So we have to find a way to build our own skills to navigate those worlds that doesn't involve selling ourselves out. right? And that's honestly why I wrote my book. Like the whole idea is like the subtitle is cracking the code of a world not built for you, because I don't want you, Will, to ever not be Will, right? I love your gifted ADHD dyslexic brain. Like it's that's what makes you so, a fun podcast host, and frankly, it makes you my friend, right?
Yeah.
But there are going to be times like, if you meet with the Australian government, they're like, we want to give you a $3 million grant to take your show on the road. You got to be the most neurotypical version of Will to get that $3 million, right?
Yeah, you're dead right. You're dead
and
right.
like, hello, government. I am Will Wheeler. Look at me being very appropriate. And you're going to get out there and you're going to take your suit and tie off and like put down a couple of VBs and be like, let's go. Right?
VB, mate. I'll have to be, things must be going pretty bad if I'm turning to the VB, mate.
Hey, there's a steak and 2 eggs in every VB. That's what they told me when I lived there.
An alcoholic's steak and 2 eggs, I think. Yeah. Anyway.
I was more of a Carlton cold guy myself, but
yeah, Carlton's not too bad. I don't drink much beer these days. I try to stay away from it. But anyway, that's a whole nother. We can make a whole different podcast on that, mate.
That'll be episode 3. Right? We'll talk about, like really get into the substances.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's not built for us. We've got to find ways to the technical term for this is code switch. Right. So I'm going to speak one way to you because you and I are neurologically very similar. Right. Then I would speak to the head of a university or my kid's teacher. Right. Or my in-laws. Like that's actually my in-laws are super neurodivergent. That's an example. But that's the thing. It's like don't sell yourself out, but develop the skill to shift your focus as needed, right? And that's how we navigate different situations better.
It's interesting because I think for me, probably the last 10 years, my career, well, actually, since the pandemic, my career has really skyrocketed into a lot of positive things because I remember before the pandemic, I would always be wearing suits, short hair, very clean cut. And I just felt like I wasn't really progressing or I was trying to be someone I wasn't. And during the pandemic, it was sort of like, you know what? Obviously I had a lot of time to think over a lot of things. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be more me. And once I was able to start being more myself, that was where the magic really started to happen. I am going into certain situations where I have to try and not be who I am. And I sometimes come up against a little bit of friction there. It can be sometimes difficult, but I'm just finding being more myself, I've been able to succeed a lot faster than when I was trying to be someone I wasn't type of thing.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, like if there's a singular takeaway from this episode, and I hope that people take a lot of takeaways from it, it is absolutely that. It's that you are going to go much further and faster and have more meaningful success being the most authentic version of you than trying to be somebody you're not. Right?
Yeah.
Try to be neurotypical if you're not neurotypical. Find environments that allow you to lean into your neurodivergence and be the best version of that.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. So while I'm building Neurodiversity Academy, I have to work a part-time job. That's what an entrepreneur has to do when you're building a business, right? And so what I do, I actually help people with disabilities start businesses. So I work with the government gives money to people to help them start a business. But I always share that I'm dyslexic and ADHD. And it was actually interesting. I had this person stay back and ask me questions the other day. And they're like, oh, my God, I'm ADHD. And she was talking about how she's like, I'm really worried because when I'm listening to people, I'm actually doodling or doing something else, but I'm still listening and doing this. And she's like, do you think I should change? Or I'm like, hell no. I said, what you do is awesome. If you can be who you are. And she's like, but people get annoyed because I speak over the top of them. And I'm like, look, the main thing is you're mindful of it. When you can be yourself, that's where a lot of great things are going to happen. And I think that's just from my experience anyway.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would absolutely agree with you, right? And so much of, when I went to a summer camp for gifted students when I was younger, I called my mom after the first day and I said, Mom, I don't have to pretend to not be smart here. I don't have to spend that mental energy holding myself back, because surprise, surprise, when you're not holding yourself back, you're putting more energy into the things that make you special and awesome. Like, there's no downside to that, right? So I just tell people, like, if you find those spaces, then you're going to be amazed at what you can do. And one of my favorite expressions has always been, if a flower's not growing, you don't yell at the flower, you change the greenhouse. And I think that a lot of us are searching for those greenhouses, and you starting you talking to helping people start their own businesses who are, who have disabilities, like, you're helping them create their own greenhouse that's going to work well, right? That's a really cool thing.
Yeah, and I think just helping people to be able to see what's good in themselves, especially when you're running a business, is vital.
Yeah, absolutely.
But look, we are getting to the end, but we do have another question which I think sort of flows in well with what we're talking about. What could schools and workplaces do better to support 2E individuals?
Oh, man. How much time do we have?
4 minutes.
All right, let me see. What can I do? All right, let's start with we have to meet kids where they are, right? And that is going to play out across all different aspects of that asynchronous development chart that we talked about before. So that's number one, right? Meet kids where they are. So if you have a 10-year-old who can play orchestral music like a 20-year-old but reads like a 3-year-old, then we've got to get them into the music program for 20-year-old and teach them to read like a 3-year-old. Both pieces of that have to be true, right? Second piece here would be, let kids go as high and as far and as deep as they need to go in the things they learn, because so often we are teaching kids, like, learn as much as you can until I tell you to stop. If a kid wants to know more about astronomy and the unit only covers the 8 planets, then we are missing an opportunity to reach that kid in a meaningful way. Because why would we tell a kid to stop, right? Let's keep going. And then last but not least, being smart isn't easy. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is integrate more social emotional learning into the way that we teach all neurodivergent kids, and really all kids in general, right? But, like, it's not easy to get along with people. It isn't, especially if your brains don't work like theirs. So if you can lean into those, those spaces and develop those skills, then you're going to find that people are going to respond to you a lot more. They're going to open up to you a lot more, and we will be much better off for it.
Yeah, awesome. Well put, Dr. Matt. Well put. Did I hear your well, I didn't hear. I know you've just released a book. Did you want to plug it?
I mean, I would love to plug it. So it's called the Neurodiversity Playbook. And it's a book that's sort of a lot about what we were talking about today. Like, if you understand your brain, you can build the skills that help you to develop the things you need to be successful in today's world. And what that looks like for you as as a neurodivergent person is going to look different than somebody else, right? So So yeah, so it's funny. It's got a lot of pop culture references. It's kind of, me in a book, right? So if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, you likely would enjoy this book. And it's available on Amazon. I don't know when they're going to ship them to Australia, but we do have a big order from Australia, so I know we're sending some books there eventually.
So, I didn't realize. I thought like you could get any book on Amazon, but it can only be done per country, can it?
Yeah, I think they
Because I thought they print it. It depends how you've got it. Like I thought, so it's not like you can't get like a digital version of the book.
Yeah.
It's all hard copy, is it?
Well, we're going to release a digital version soon and an audiobook. I just don't know.
Oh, cool.
I don't know when those are going to be. So.
Okay, yeah. But keep an eye out for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Sorry, I've just got something has popped up on my screen here. Thank God that's gone. But look, Dr. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Where else can people connect with you and find out more about your work?
Oh man, I am chronically online, so that would be a good place to start. So I have I have two primary roles, right? I am a clinical psychologist and a professional speaker. So for the psychology piece, you'd go to the neurodiversitycollective.com. And if you want me to speak to your organization or your school, then you'd go to drmattzakreski.com. So it's drmattzakreski.com if you want me for your organization, the neurodiversitycollective.com if you want me for you.
Yeah, awesome. Dr. Matt, it's always a pleasure when we catch up with you, my friend. You're always very entertaining. I do want to make my way to America one day. I'm hoping with everything that's gone on, it's not going to be too expensive to go to America. But Dr. Matt, it's always a pleasure, my friend.
Well, when you come out, I will be the first person to meet you at the airport, and we'll show you a good time here in America because there are still good things about this country, I promise.
Totally. I do want to come to your side for sure. Anyway. But look, thank you so much, Dr. Matt. And for all of our other listeners, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. Check us out, subscribe, and comment on all of our things on wherever you listen to your podcast. My name's Will Wheeler, and this is Neurodivergent Mates. Till next time.